My name is Iris, and at 34, I learned that my chair came with conditions. At my parents' 35th anniversary party, my dad pointed me toward the garage and said it was just for extended family. The folding chairs in there had metal legs that wobbled on the concrete floor, and I sat next to my cousin's third husband, while my sister Lisa sat at the head table between my mother and the caterer. I remember the exact angle of the garage door propped open with a brick so we could see the party, but not be part of it. The music from the backyard reached us with a 2-second delay, and every laugh arrived out of sync. I was 3 feet from the threshold, where the concrete turned to patio stone, and my father checked on us twice to make sure we hadn't drifted inside for more napkins. He smiled when he saw me still there. He said, "Iris, you always understand," and he meant I always sit where I'm told. My mother planned that anniversary party for 8 months, and I planned it with her. I did the guest list. I negotiated the rental contract. I designed the place cards, and I called every single vendor to confirm times. When the caterer canceled 3 days before, I found a replacement at 4 in the morning. I did this because my mother asked, and because it was my parents' anniversary, and because someone had to. Lisa sent a floral arrangement from a shop she found on Instagram and arrived 20 minutes late with a new dress, and everyone kissed her cheeks and said she was wonderful for traveling all that way. She lived 45 minutes from the venue. I lived 6 blocks. The garage chair had a sticker on the underside that said property of St. Mark's Church Hall. I saw it when I shifted my weight because the metal was cold through my dress, and I could feel the exact pattern of the rivets pressed into my thigh. My father had borrowed those chairs for the overflow guests. I didn't know I was overflow until I arrived. I thought I was the daughter who planned the whole event, who held the binder, who memorized every vendor's cell phone. But my father walked me past the round tables with the white linens and pointed toward the garage. He said we need the main table for immediate family. You understand. He didn't say I was immediate family. He said I would understand. Visual sticker on underside of a folding chair. Property of St. Mark's Church Hall. The first time I understood the difference between usefulness and worth, I was 12 years old, and my parents were buying Lisa a horse. Lisa was 14, and she'd taken riding lessons for 2 summers, and my mother said it would build character. My father said it cost $14,000, and Lisa cried in the kitchen until he wrote the check. I watched from the hallway where I'd come down for water. Lisa got the horse, and she got a new saddle, and she got riding boots that cost $400. And she quit lessons 3 months later because the barn smelled. The horse stayed in a stable, and my parents paid board for 2 more years before they sold it at a loss. That same fall, I asked for a graphing calculator for algebra. I needed it for class. The calculator cost $89. My mother said they'd spent enough on school supplies, and I could use the ones in the classroom. When I brought home a C on my first semester exam, my father said I wasn't applying myself. He said I didn't have the drive that Lisa had. I was 12 years old, and I had no horse and no calculator, and I was the one who hadn't applied myself. I sat in my room and I worked the problems longhand in a notebook for 3 hours every night. I got a B on the final. My mother said that was better, but my father had already stopped reading my report card. Visual. A graphing calculator, $89. A handwritten receipt from an office supply store. The second time I understood was when I was 16, and my mother needed a cosigner for a car lease for Lisa. My father's credit had dipped because of a business loan, and then my mother's was tied to the house. They didn't ask Lisa to co-sign. They asked me. I had a part-time job at a bookstore, and I'd saved $600, and I was a minor, but my mother took me to the dealership anyway and had me sign the forms next to her. She said, "You're so responsible, Iris, it's just paperwork." I signed. Lisa got the car. Lisa crashed the car 3 months later into a mailbox, and my parents paid the insurance deductible, and I got a letter from the bank 6 months after that saying my credit score had been affected. I didn't know what that meant until I was 20 and tried to rent my first apartment. I was denied because of an auto claim tied to my name. Lisa was driving a newer car by then. She never asked. So when I say my family treated my usefulness and my worth as separate things, I mean I was always the one who signed, the one who paid, the one who stayed late, the one who understood, and I was never the one in the main room. The arrangement began because I couldn't stop it. My mother had a calendar for every holiday and every birthday and every appointment, and she couldn't keep track of password. I was 22, and I was working at a call center, and I lived in a studio apartment with a hot plate, and I drove 20 minutes to their house twice a week to reset her email password and log her into the grocery delivery app and show her how to check the thermostat through the phone. I said, "I'll just make one account and you can use it." I didn't mean it as a trap. I meant it as a convenience. I created the family account with my email as the recovery. I put my phone number as the secondary verification. I chose a password nobody would guess. I didn't charge them for it. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted them to stop calling me at work. Visual: a password manager dashboard, one family account, one recovery email. That was 11 years ago. For 11 years I have been the one who remembers the login for the property tax portal. For 11 years I have been the one who pays the annual cabin taxes from my own account and waits for my father to reimburse me, because he says he'll do it next week. And next week never comes. For 11 years I have been the one who updates the family calendar, who books the flights, who coordinates the dinner reservations, who holds the credit card that earns points for their travel. I never missed a single filing deadline. I never let the domain name expire on my father's business website. I answered every call from every vendor, and I smoothed over every miscommunication, and I did it with the same smile I gave them from the garage chair. The cabin taxes are $5,800 per year. For the last 7 years I have paid them, and my father has reimbursed me for 3. The other 4, he said he'd get to it. I have an email chain that goes back to 2019 with the subject line tax reimbursement, and every message ends with him saying he'll transfer it tomorrow. $23,000. He doesn't know I keep the emails. He doesn't know I have a spreadsheet with the dates and the amounts and the screenshots of his promises. I started it after the 3rd year because I thought if I tracked it, I could prove it to him and he would pay me back. That was the part of me that still believed in receipts. That was the part of me that thought, if I had the evidence, I would finally be seen. The real personal cost was never the money. The cost was that I built my entire identity around being the one who could be relied on. I turned down a promotion at work 6 years ago because it required travel, and my mother said she needed me to handle the family trust paperwork. I canceled a vacation with friends 3 years ago because my father said he'd be out of town, and someone had to be there to let the electrician in. I stayed single for years without realizing I was staying single. I was the family's administrative assistant, and I thought that was a role I had chosen. I thought I was being generous. I thought generosity and visibility were the same thing. Visual. Spreadsheet open on a laptop. Dates, amounts, screenshots attached. The mechanism came from a trust. My grandmother established it in 1985, with $200,000 split between my father and my aunt. When my aunt died in 2010, her share reverted to the trust with a clause that required the remaining beneficiary to maintain the property in the family for at least 15 years before transferring or selling. I read that document when I was 23 because my mother handed me a stack of estate papers and said, "Iris, just file these." And I filed them, but not before I read every page. The clause was in Section 4, Paragraph 2, and it said the property could not be sold or transferred out of the family trust without unanimous consent of all adult descendants. There are 3 adult descendants. My father, Manny, Benimalatin, I thought, Tony, so, and me. My father never read that clause. Neither did Lisa. They assumed the trust was just a document that said what it said, and they didn't need to look at it because I was the one who filed things. I kept that page in my head for 11 years. I never mentioned it. I never had to. It was just there in the back of my thoughts like a door I knew existed, but never needed to open. 3 years ago, my father started talking about selling the cabin. He said the taxes were too high, and the maintenance was a burden, and he wanted to cash out. Lisa agreed. What? No, not mine. Lisa said the cabin was old and drafty, and she'd rather have the money. I sat at the dining table with the spreadsheets I'd made for the taxes and the repairs, and I showed them that the property was valued at $370,000. My father waved his hand. He said, "Iris, you always understand it's a family decision." That was the first time I heard the callback. He meant I would agree because I always did. He meant I would sit in my chair and nod and let Lisa take whatever she wanted, because I was the one who understood. I said, "Okay." "Oh." I said, "I understand." Now away. I was 31, and I still believed that if I was patient enough, they would notice the work I'd done. I still believed that being useful would eventually translate into being valued. I sat at that table and I listened to them plan how to spend money that was partially mine, and I said nothing. I went home and I opened the trust document, and I read Section 4, Paragraph 2 again. The language was so dry, it could have been a recipe for oatmeal. It said unanimous consent required from all adult descendants. I read it 3 times. I closed the laptop. No, I didn't tell anyone. Visual. Trust document. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Highlighted text. Then came the wedding. Lisa announced her engagement to a man named Brent Caldwell, and my mother started planning immediately. The Caldwells were high status in the way my mother loved. They had a lake house and a country club membership, and their son had a law degree. My mother wanted everything to be perfect. She wanted 160 guests. She wanted a sit-down dinner. She wanted flowers flown in from somewhere she could name drop. She asked me to handle the budget because she knew I was good with spreadsheets. I said yes because I always said yes. The wedding cost $83,000. Lisa wanted a venue that cost $18,000 just for the rental. She wanted a photographer from New York who charged $11,000. She wanted a band instead of a DJ, and the band was $8,000. My mother signed every contract with the checkbook, and she put Lisa's name as the primary. I was the one who called the vendors and confirmed the deposit amounts, and I was the one who set up the payment schedule. My mother wanted a credit card with a high limit for the final balances, and she asked me to apply because her credit was tied up with the house. I said yes. The credit card was in my name with a $38,000 limit. My mother planned to pay it off after the wedding. She said she'd transfer the balance from the family account. I asked her what family account, and she laughed. She said the one you made Iris, the one for the taxes. I said that account had a different purpose, and she said it's just money. It's all the same. She was right in a mechanical sense. Money is fungible, but she was wrong in a way she couldn't see. The card was the lever. I didn't plan it that way. I just applied because she asked, and I said yes because I always said yes. But when the card arrived, I signed the activation form and I put it in my wallet, and I didn't give her the number. I said I'd make the payments directly to the vendors when the invoices came. I told Shul. I said it was easier that way. I said you always understand. I used her own phrase and she smiled and said, "That's my Iris." Visual, credit card, Iris's name, $38,000 limit, unactivated in a drawer. The real story of the money is that it wasn't my mother's to promise. The family account I created for the taxes was also the account that held my grandmother's remaining trust distributions. My father had been drawing from it for years for what he called maintenance expenses. He thought it was his money. He never read the trust document that said the property and its associated accounts were to be held for all descendants equally. He drew $47,000 over 6 years, and he never told me because he didn't think I'd check. I checked every month. I watched the withdrawals. I knew exactly what he took and when. I didn't confront him because I couldn't prove he knew it was wrong. I didn't confront him because I was 32, and I still hoped he would ask me to the main table someday. Escalation came in small cuts. My mother hosted a dinner for the Caldwells 6 months before the wedding, and she asked me to bring a dessert. I brought a lemon tart from a bakery I liked. She put it in the kitchen and served a cake from a shop she'd ordered online. I watched her put my tart on a side table and then move it to the counter when the guests arrived. She told Lisa's future mother-in-law that she'd bought the tart at the farmer's market. She didn't mention I was in the kitchen. I heard her say my Lisa is so good at finding hidden gems. I was the hidden gem. I was standing 3 feet away, holding a stack of napkins I'd bought with my own money. Lisa didn't thank me for the tart. She didn't thank me for the budget. She didn't thank me for the spreadsheets or the vendor calls or the credit card or the family account I'd been maintaining for 11 years. She said, "At least you always know what to bring." And she meant I knew how to be invisible. At the rehearsal dinner, I sat at a table near the kitchen because my mother said the main table was for the wedding party and immediate family. She said, "You're not in the wedding party, Iris. It's fine, you understand." I heard the phrase a second time. She said it exactly the same way she'd said it at the anniversary party and at the dining table and every time I'd been moved to the garage or the kitchen or the side. She meant I was agreeable. She meant I would not make a scene. No. She meant my value was measured by my compliance, and my compliance was infinite. I ate the dinner with the caterer's assistants, and I made small talk about knife sharpening. I watched the main table from the corner of my eye. Lisa had a centerpiece of white flowers. My mother had a new dress. My father had a glass of whiskey and a story he'd told 100 times about the time he almost bought a boat. I had a fork and a cloth napkin and the knowledge that I had paid for 12% of this meal with the interest on my credit card. The mid-story rehook is that I knew the mechanism had already triggered. I knew it at the rehearsal dinner when I looked at my phone and saw the email from the vendor confirming the final payment due. The card was in my name, and the payment was scheduled, and I had not been reimbursed. I knew that if I didn't make that payment, the venue would cancel. I knew it, and I smiled, and I said pass the salt, and I didn't tell anyone. I waited because the story wasn't over. I waited because I wanted to see how far they would go before they noticed they were standing on a floor I'd built. Visual, a phone, an email from a venue coordinator, final payment due in 72 hours. The day of the wedding arrived. The weather was perfect. The flowers arrived on time. The photographer set up in the garden. The band tuned their instruments in the tent. Lisa looked like a storybook bride, and my mother glowed like a woman who had won something. I stood near the back of the ceremony space with a seating chart I'd laminated and a list of emergency contacts I'd memorized. My father walked Lisa down the aisle. The Caldwells sat in the front row. Brent Caldwell looked nervous and happy. Everything was beautiful and I was invisible, and I had a credit card in my wallet that could end all of it. During the cocktail hour, I overheard my mother talking to Mrs. Caldwell. She was saying Lisa is our only daughter, and Mrs. Caldwell said, "What about Iris?" And my mother said, "Iris is our other daughter. She's very helpful." She said it like I was a tool, like I was a folding chair from a church hall. She said it to the woman she was trying to impress, and she meant it as a compliment, and she did not see me standing behind the bar. I heard the word helpful, and I remembered every time I'd been told I always understood. I remembered the garage and the horse, and the car, and the taxes and the calendar, and the trust. I remembered 11 years of invisible work. I remembered the credit card in my wallet. Mrs. Caldwell looked over my mother's shoulder and saw me. She smiled. She said, "Iris, I've been looking for you. Your mother says you organized the entire day." I said I did, and my mother laughed and said, "Iris is our organizer. She's always been like that." She used the word organizer like it was the highest title she could give me. She said, "Iris always understands." That was the third time. She said it in front of Mrs. Caldwell and the caterer and the band leader and 100 guests who didn't know who I was. She said it, and she meant I would stay in my lane. I said, "Excuse me," and I walked to the restroom and I sat on the closed toilet lid and I breathed for a count of 10. I opened my phone. I looked at the trust document I'd photographed 3 years ago. I looked at the credit card balance. I looked at the spreadsheet with every tax payment and every withdrawal and every email chain. I looked at the text from my mother that said, "We'll pay you back after the wedding." I looked at my face in the mirror. Shoved a door chocolate in a mirror. I was 34 years old, and never come of this alone. I had spent half my life being useful and none of it being valued. I had a choice. I could walk out to the reception and smile and open my wallet and pay for the party, or I could watch it break. Visual, restroom mirror, a woman in a blue dress, a phone in her hand. I opened the email draft I'd written 3 weeks earlier. It was addressed to the trust administrator and it requested a formal accounting of all withdrawals and distributions from the family trust since 2010. I had not sent it yet. Oh, I had written it and saved it and left it in my drafts because I was afraid. I was afraid of what my father would say. I was afraid of being called ungrateful. I was afraid of being moved to a farther garage. I was afraid that if I demanded to be seen, I would find out that I had never been visible at all. I sent the email. I sent it from the restroom of my sister's wedding with 100 people waiting for champagne and dancing. I sent it to the administrator and I carbon copied my father and Lisa and my aunt's estate attorney. I sent it at 7:34 p.m. The subject line was Trust Accounting Request. The body was 3 sentences. The first sentence said I was requesting a full ledger of all distributions to all beneficiaries. The second sentence said I was requesting a copy of the original trust documents. The third sentence said I was requesting an explanation for any use of trust funds for non-property expenses. Then I decided to lodge the meter in my credit card app. I looked at the balance. The final payments to the vendors had cleared that morning, and the total was $34,200. The card was in my name. The limit was $38,000. I had made every deposit to every vendor. I had signed every contract as the authorized user. I had done this without telling my mother that she was not authorized. I had done this because she'd asked, and because I said yes, and because I'd never had the words to refuse. I had the words now. I walked back to the reception. The first dance was starting. Lisa and Brent swayed under the fairy lights and everyone clapped, and my mother cried happy tears, and my father had a new glass of whiskey. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, and I watched them spin, and I felt something I'd never felt before. I felt the absolute stillness of knowing that I had already sent the email and already made the choice, and the mechanism was already moving. I didn't have to raise my voice or cry or perform a scene. I just had to stand there and wait. Visual. Fairy lights above a dance floor. Bride and groom spinning. A woman at the edge watching. The reckoning came during dessert. The caterer was cutting the cake, and my mother was collecting the plates, and I was standing near the bar with a glass of water. My phone buzzed. It was the trust administrator. He had replied to my email. He said he'd reviewed the records and would forward the full ledger by the end of the week, but he wanted to confirm my understanding of Section 4, Paragraph 2. Yes, I understand. I used the phrase one more time. I meant it differently. Then my father walked over. He was flushed from the whiskey and the heat. He said, Iris, what's this trust accounting request? He said it loud enough that Mrs. Caldwell turned her head. He said, I don't understand why you're meddling in this today. He said, it's not the time or place. He said, Iris, you always understand. That was the 4th time. He said it at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place. He said it in front of the woman he was trying to impress and the band and the caterer and 160 guests who were wondering why the father of the bride was speaking to someone in the back of the room like she was a misdelivered package. I put down my water glass. I said, no, I don't understand. No. I said it plain and level and flat. I said I don't understand why the trust has $47,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. I don't understand why the cabin taxes have been paid from my account for 7 years. I don't understand why a credit card in my name is holding $34,000 of wedding debt. I don't understand why I have been the family accountant and the family organizer and the family doormat. And I'm still being told I always understand when I don't understand any of it. My father said you're making a scene. I said I'm not making anything. I'm just reading the receipt. I pulled out my phone. I opened the spreadsheet. I held it up so he could see the rows and columns, and the total column that said $23,000 for the taxes and $47,000 for the trust and $34,000 for the wedding. I said, this is what I understand. I said, this is what I've understood for 11 years. Mrs. Caldwell walked over. She said, is everything all right? No. My mother said it's fine. It's just Iris. Mrs. Caldwell looked at my phone. She read the numbers. She said, Iris, you've been paying for this wedding. No. I said, I've been holding the credit card. She said, your mother told me the family account was covering the final payments. I said the family account is a trust with my name on it, and my mother isn't a signatory. Visual, a phone screen with a spreadsheet, numbers, dates, totals, Deutsch. Mrs. Caldwell looked at my mother. No. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the phone. Lisa had stopped dancing. Brent Caldwell walked over and said, what's going on? And his mother said, your wedding is being paid for by a credit card that belongs to Iris. She said it like a fact. She said it like it was an accounting problem. She said it without sympathy and without anger. She just stated the procedural truth and let it sit. My mother said we were going to pay her back. Mrs. Caldwell said, when? My mother said after the wedding. Mrs. Caldwell said the wedding is currently happening. She said it perfectly calm. She said it like a lawyer reading a contract. She was the outsider witness I didn't know I had. She was the woman my mother had been trying to impress, and she was looking at the receipts, and she was not impressed. My father said, Iris, you're embarrassing the family. I said, I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm just asking for what I'm owed. I said I sent the trust accounting request because I wanted to know where the money went. I said I found out that you've been drawing from my grandmother's trust for years without telling me. I said I found out that Lisa's horse and Lisa's car and Lisa's wedding were paid for with money that should have been divided among all of us. I said I found out that I have been paying for all of it, and I have been the only one who understood. And now I'm feeling. Lisa said, Iris, stop it. I said, stop what? She said, stop trying to ruin my wedding. I said, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not saving it. Visual, a credit card on a bar top, Iris's name. $38,000 limit, decline. I opened the credit card app one more time. Moi. I looked at the balance and the available credit and the payment due date. I looked at the notice that said the card was approaching its limit. I looked at the authorization I'd given for the final vendor payments. I revoked it. I clicked the button that said, Cancel recurring payments. I did it right there with my mother watching, and my father watching, and Mrs. Caldwell watching, and 160 guests who had no idea what was happening. I clicked Confirm. The band kept playing. The caterer kept serving. But the vendor payments that hadn't cleared yet would not clear now. The venue still had a final deposit due. The photographer still had a balance. The band still had a contract. I had been the authorized user, and I was no longer authorizing. I was not attacking. I was just withdrawing. I was simply removing the invisible labor that had been propping up the entire structure. My mother said, "You can't do this." I said, "I just did." She said, "You're ruining your sister's wedding." I said, "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped fixing it." She said, "Iris, you always understand." I said, "I do now." Then I walked out. I walked past the garage where I'd sat 3 years ago. I walked past the folding chairs with the church stickers. I walked past the fairy lights, and the band and the caterer and the cake that I had not tasted. I walked to my car and I sat in the driver's seat, and I turned off my phone. I drove to my apartment and I sat on my couch and I watched the sky get dark, and I felt nothing except the absence of having to be helpful. The quiet dismantling began immediately. The venue called my father the next morning because the final payment had been declined. The photographer sent an email about an outstanding balance of $4,000. The band's manager left 3 voicemails. My mother had to call every vendor and explain that the payment method had changed and she had to find a new credit card in a hurry. She didn't have one. How to amend? She had used my card as the primary because she'd assumed I'd cover it. She'd assumed I would always cover it. Visual. A phone. 23 missed calls. A voicemail from a wedding venue. The trust accounting came through 3 days later. My father had been drawing from the trust for 11 years. He'd used it for property taxes and maintenance, and also for Lisa's car insurance and a vacation to Mexico and a new roof on his house that wasn't the cabin. He'd taken $47,000 that should have been split among all 3 of us. He'd taken it without asking. He'd taken it because he thought I wouldn't notice. He'd taken it because I was the one who filed things, and he assumed I would file them and forget. I didn't forget. I had a spreadsheet with every single transaction. Oh. I sent it to the trust administrator, and I copied Lisa and my mother and my father. I said I wanted a formal accounting and a repayment plan. I said I wanted the trust divided equally, as my grandmother intended. I said I wanted the cabin sold or bought out within 90 days. I said these things in writing, and I used language that came from the document itself. I didn't attack. I just requested compliance with existing terms. My father called me 6 times in the first hour. I let them ring. He texted, "Call me." I didn't. He texted, "We can work this out." I didn't. He texted, "You're destroying the family." I read that message and I put my phone in a drawer, and I went to the grocery store. Lisa called the next day. She said, "I can't believe you did this at my wedding." No. I said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." She said, "You ruined everything." I said, "I stopped paying for everything. There's a difference." She said, "You're always so dramatic." I said, "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate." She said, "You could have waited." I said, "I waited 11 years. No. She was quiet. I said, "You remember the horse?" She said, "What?" I said, "The horse you got when you were 14. The one that cost $14,000. She said, "That was a long time ago." I said, "Yes, it was. You don't remember who signed the papers." She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, That's the problem. Visual, a kitchen counter, groceries, a phone face down beside them. The fallout rippled faster than I expected. The Caldwells called my mother and said they wanted to know the full financial situation before they contributed anything to Brent and Lisa's future. Mrs. Caldwell had been a lawyer for 30 years, and she had seen enough. She called me on the third day. She said, "I reviewed your trust documents. Your father's withdrawals were not authorized." She said, "If you need a witness for the accounting, I'm available." No, she didn't say it with warmth. She said it with precision. She was a professional who valued accuracy, and she'd seen my mother's version of events, and she'd seen mine, and she'd chosen the one that had the receipts. My mother sent a long email. She said I had been a difficult child. She said I had always been jealous of Lisa. She said I was using this as an excuse to punish everyone. She said, "After everything we did for you," and I read that line, and I remembered the graphing calculator, and the garage chair, and the credit denial at 20, and the horse I never rode. I remembered being told I always understood, and I remembered understanding that I was not supposed to ask for anything. I wrote back and I said, "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just asking to be reimbursed for what I paid. That's all." I sent it, and I closed my laptop, and I didn't check for a reply until the next morning. My father left 2 voicemails. The first one was angry. He said I was selfish. He said I was ungrateful. Now in a minute, new child. He said I was trying to tear the family apart. The second one was different. He sounded tired. He said I didn't realize you were paying for so much. He said I didn't realize the trust worked that way. He said I should have read the documents. He paused. He said you always understood them better than I did. I heard that phrase one more time. He said it like it was a compliment. He said it like it was the highest praise he could give me. I understood better. I always understood. And I was finally done with it. I didn't call him back. I didn't answer the text messages from Lisa. I didn't engage with my mother's emails. I just waited. The trust administrator scheduled a meeting, and I attended by video, and my father attended in person, and Lisa attended from her phone. The administrator read the accounting aloud. He said the trust had been depleted by $62,000 in unauthorized distributions. He said the cabin could not be sold without my consent, and he said the cabin taxes had been paid by me, and that those payments would be reimbursed from the trust balance before any distribution to my father. Visual, a laptop screen, a video call, 3 faces, a spreadsheet shared on screen. My father said, "Iris, I can explain." I said, "You don't have to explain. The documents explain everything." He said, "I didn't know." I said, "You had a responsibility to know." He said, "You're my daughter." I said, "Yes, I am. And I've been the only one acting like it." He asked for leniency. He asked for time. He asked if we could work something out. I said, "You have 90 days to reimburse the trust. That's the timeline in the document. I didn't write it. I'm just following it." I said it flat and factual. I said it like I was reading a manual. No. I said it, and I watched his face go through 6 different emotions and settle on resignation. He knew I was right. He knew I had always been right. He just never thought I would say it. The cabin sold 6 weeks later. The buyer was a family from Atlanta who wanted a lakefront property. The proceeds went to the trust. The trust was divided evenly. I received $112,000. That was my share. That was my grandmother's gift to me that had been sitting in a document for 40 years, waiting for me to claim it. I didn't spend it on anything dramatic. I paid off the credit card. I paid off my own student loans that my parents had told me to take because they couldn't help. I put the rest into a retirement account. I bought a new table. It was a solid oak table with 6 chairs, and it fit in my small dining room, and I set it up myself. I ate dinner at it alone for the first time, and I felt the weight of the wood under my elbows, and I thought about how many meals I had served on paper plates at the edge of other people's parties. My mother called on a Thursday. She said Elisa was having a hard time. She said Brent was stressed about the debt. No, want to hear you. She said the Caldwells were pulling back from the wedding plans. She said we could really use your help sorting out the finances. She said it like I was still the organizer. She said it like I had not just walked out of a garage and into my own life. She said, Iris, you always know how to handle these things. I said I do. I said I know how to handle them. I'm just not going to. She said, what does that mean? I said it means I've handled enough. I said I handled the trust. I handled the taxes. I handled the wedding. I handled everything for 11 years. I said now, I'm handling my own life. I said goodbye, Mom. She called back 4 times. I let each one ring. She texted. I didn't open the messages for 2 days. When I finally opened them, she had written a long paragraph about how she hadn't realized, and how she was sorry, and how she wished she could fix things. She said, I never meant to make you feel like you weren't.